The iron wheels of the train screeched against the rails as Thea Sinclair pressed her forehead to the cold window glass, tears streaming down her pale cheeks in an endless river that had begun somewhere back in Missouri and showed no signs of stopping. The vast Colorado landscape stretched before her like an unforgiving canvas of browns and golds, so different from the green hills of her childhood that it made her chest ache with a homesickness so profound she could barely draw breath. She was 22 years old, a mail-order bride traveling to meet a man she had never seen, fleeing a life that had crumbled around her like old paper. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving debts that swallowed their small farm whole. Her mother had followed him to the grave just 8 weeks later, some said from a broken heart. Others whispered it was the consumption that had been eating at her lungs for years. Thea had been left with nothing but the clothes on her back and a stack of bills that would have taken her a lifetime to repay. When she saw the advertisement in the newspaper seeking a bride for a rancher in Gunnison, Colorado, she had written back with hands that shook so badly she could barely hold the pen. Now, as the train carried her toward her uncertain future, she could not stop the tears. They fell like rain, soaking the collar of her threadbare traveling dress, the only decent garment she owned. The other passengers had stopped looking at her with concern hours ago. Now they simply avoided her gaze, uncomfortable with such a raw display of grief and fear. The train lurched to a stop at the small station in Gunnison, and Thea gathered her single carpetbag with trembling hands. She stepped onto the platform into the late afternoon sun of September 1878, the altitude making her head spin slightly. The air was thinner here, crisp and clean in a way that made her lungs work harder. She stood there, tears still streaming down her face, searching the small crowd for a man she would only recognize from the brief description in his letters. Tall, dark-haired, runs a cattle ranch south of town. But it was not her intended who approached her first. Zachary Morgan had come to town for supplies, his wagon already loaded with sacks of grain and coils of rope. He was 26 years old, lean and weathered from years of working cattle under the Colorado sun. His dark hair was too long, curling slightly at his collar beneath his worn hat, and his eyes were the color of whiskey in sunlight. He had stopped to water his horses when he saw her standing on the platform, and what made him pause was not her beauty, though she was lovely despite her distress, but the absolute brokenness in the way she stood there, crying as though her heart had shattered into 1,000 pieces. He watched as she looked around desperately, clutching her bag to her chest like a shield. No one approached her. The few people on the platform hurried past, uncomfortable with her tears. Zachary felt something twist in his chest, something he had not felt in the 3 years since his own world had fallen apart. He had sworn off women, sworn off feeling anything beyond the simple satisfaction of a hard day's work and a hot meal at the end of it. But there was something about the sight of this woman, standing alone and crying, that made his feet move before his mind could stop them. He crossed the dusty platform with long strides, his boots echoing on the wooden boards. When he reached her, he saw that her eyes were the most remarkable shade of blue, like deep water, and they were swimming with tears that just kept coming and coming. "Miss, are you all right?" His voice was deeper than she expected, rough with disuse. He did not talk much these days, living alone on his small ranch with only his horses and cattle for company. Thea looked up at him and tried to speak, but all that came out was a sob. She shook her head, unable to form words, and the tears fell faster. She was mortified, standing here crying in front of this stranger, but she could not stop. It was as if every loss, every fear, every moment of grief she had pushed down for the past 6 months was pouring out of her all at once, and she was powerless against the flood. "I am waiting for someone," she finally managed to choke out between sobs. "A man named Robert Jenkins. He is supposed to meet me here. I am his bride from Missouri." Zachary knew Robert Jenkins. Everyone in the area knew him. He was a hard man, quick with his fists and his temper, twice widowed under circumstances that had made the women in town whisper behind their hands. The thought of this crying woman going to live with Jenkins made something cold settle in Zachary's stomach. "Jenkins," he repeated, and he could not keep the disapproval from his voice. Thea heard it and felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. "You know him. Is he not coming? Did he change his mind?" The thought of being stranded here, alone, with nowhere to go and no money, made panic rise in her throat. "I know him," Zachary said carefully. He looked around the platform again. The sun was getting lower in the sky, painting everything gold and orange. "But I do not see him here." At that moment, a man stumbled out of the saloon across the street. Even from this distance, Zachary could see it was Robert Jenkins, and he was drunk. Jenkins weaved across the rutted road, nearly getting trampled by a horse and wagon, and made his way toward the station. When he got close enough, Thea could smell the whiskey on him, could see the red in his eyes and the mean set of his mouth. "You the woman from Missouri?" Jenkins demanded, looking her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "Stop that crying right now. I will not have a wife who wails like a sick cat." Thea tried to stop, truly she did, but the tears would not obey. If anything, they came harder, and she began to shake with the force of her sobs. She was terrified, exhausted, and now faced with this drunk, angry man who was supposed to be her husband. Jenkins stepped closer, his hand raised as if to strike her. "I said stop that noise." But before his hand could fall, Zachary moved between them. He was several inches taller than Jenkins and broader through the shoulders from years of hard ranch work. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but carried a threat that made Jenkins take a step back. "You will not touch her. She is my bride, Morgan. I paid for her passage. She is mine." Jenkins tried to move around Zachary, but the younger man shifted to block him. "No one is anyone's property, Jenkins. You know that, and you are drunk. Go sleep it off. I will have the law on you for this. You cannot keep a man from his intended wife." Zachary looked at Thea, who was still crying, her whole body trembling with fear and exhaustion. He made a decision that would change both their lives, though he did not know it then. "The lady will come with me. When you are sober, if she still wants to marry you, that will be her choice. But not like this. Not today." Jenkins sputtered and swore, but several men had gathered to watch the confrontation, and he was outnumbered. With a final curse, he stumbled back toward the saloon, promising retribution and involving the law. Zachary turned to Thea, who was looking at him with those drowning blue eyes, still crying, though perhaps not quite as hard. "Miss, I have a ranch about 5 miles south of here. It is not much, but it is clean and safe. You can stay there until you figure out what you want to do. I give you my word that you will not be harmed." Thea knew she should be cautious. She did not know this man any better than she knew Jenkins, but there was something in his eyes, a kindness beneath the weather-worn exterior that made her nod. Besides, what choice did she have? She could not stay here on the platform, and she certainly could not go with Jenkins in his current state. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I am Thea Sinclair, Zachary Morgan. My friends call me Zach." He picked up her carpetbag as if it weighed nothing and guided her toward his wagon with a gentle hand at her elbow. He helped her up onto the seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they rolled out of town, Thea continued to cry. She could not help it. The tears just kept coming, silent now but constant, trailing down her cheeks and dripping onto her hands folded in her lap. Zachary did not comment on it. He simply drove, occasionally glancing at her with concern, and when they were about halfway to his ranch, he pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her without a word. She took it gratefully, pressing it to her face, but it was quickly soaked through. The crying had become almost rhythmic now, something she could not control, her body purging itself of months of held-back grief. The ranch, when they reached it, was modest but well-maintained. A small house with a stone chimney, a barn, a corral with several horses, and beyond that, rolling pasture where cattle grazed in the fading light. Zachary helped her down from the wagon, and she stood there in his yard, still crying, looking lost and small in the vast landscape. "Come inside," he said gently. "You must be hungry." The house was neat, surprisingly so for a bachelor. The main room held a stone fireplace, a worn but comfortable-looking sofa, a table with 2 chairs, and a small kitchen area. A door led to what she assumed was a bedroom. Everything was clean, if sparsely decorated. Zachary lit a lamp as the last light faded from the windows. "The bedroom is yours. I will sleep out here on the sofa. There is water in the pitcher if you want to wash up, and I will make us some supper." Thea stood in the middle of the room, still crying, feeling utterly helpless. "I cannot stop," she said miserably. "I do not know what is wrong with me. I just cannot stop crying." Zachary looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face softened. He had lost his own parents to a fever when he was 23, had lost his younger sister to pneumonia the winter after that. He knew what grief looked like. He knew what it felt like to be so full of sorrow that it had to find a way out or else drown you from the inside. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the sofa. When she obeyed, sinking down into the cushions, he surprised them both by sitting beside her. Not too close, maintaining a respectful distance, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of another human being. "You have had a loss." It was not a question, but she nodded anyway, and the words came pouring out between her sobs. She told him about her father's death, her mother's decline, the debts, the desperate decision to answer an advertisement from a stranger. She told him about the long journey west, every mile taking her farther from everything she had ever known, bringing her closer to a future that terrified her. She told him how she had not let herself cry during the funeral, during the sale of the farm, during the long train ride, because she was afraid if she started she would never stop, and she had been right. Now that the tears had started, they would not stop. Zachary listened to all of it, and when she fell silent except for her crying, he did something he had not done in 3 years. He reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold and small in his calloused palm. "My folks died too," he said quietly. "And my sister Sarah. I was alone after that. Came out here to Colorado to start fresh, thought I could outrun the grief. But it does not work that way. Grief is like a debt. You have to pay it before you can move on." "How do I pay it?" Thea asked, her voice breaking. "How do I make it stop hurting?" "You do not make it stop. You feel it. All of it. And then one day you find you can breathe a little easier. And then one day after that you might even smile. And eventually you can remember the good things without it breaking you apart." He squeezed her hand gently. "But you have to let yourself feel it first." So Thea cried. She cried while Zachary got up and made a simple supper of beans and cornbread. She cried while she tried to eat, though she managed a few bites. She cried as exhaustion finally began to overtake her, and when she swayed where she sat, Zachary guided her to the bedroom, made sure she had everything she needed, and left her alone, closing the door softly behind him. In the morning, she woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of someone working outside. For a moment, she did not remember where she was, and then it all came rushing back. The train, the platform, Jenkins, and Zachary Morgan. She touched her face and found her cheeks dry, but when she sat up, the tears started again, gentle but persistent. She washed her face and hands, changed into her only other dress, and ventured out into the main room. Zachary was not there, but there was coffee on the stove and fresh bread wrapped in a cloth on the table. She poured herself a cup of coffee and stood at the window, watching him work with the horses in the corral, and cried into her cup. This became the pattern of her days. She cried, and Zachary went about his work, never commenting on her tears but always aware of them. He would come in for meals and find her crying while she tried to cook, cry while she swept the floors, cry while she sat on the porch watching the sunset. He never told her to stop. He never looked at her with frustration or anger. He simply accepted it, the way he accepted the changing seasons or the rising sun. On the third day, Robert Jenkins rode out to the ranch. Zachary met him in the yard, and Thea watched from the window, her vision blurred by tears. She could not hear what they said, but she saw Jenkins gesture angrily, saw Zachary stand his ground, arms crossed over his chest. Finally, Zachary called to her. "Thea, come out here, please." She went, wiping at her eyes though the tears kept falling. Jenkins looked at her with disgust. "You are still crying. What kind of wife are you going to make, crying all the time like a baby?" He turned to Zachary. "You can keep her. I will not be saddled with a woman who does nothing but wail." He rode off before either of them could respond, and Thea felt a confusing mix of relief and shame. Relief that she would not have to marry that hard, cruel man, but shame that she had been rejected, that her tears had made her unworthy even of a mail-order marriage. "It is for the best," Zachary said quietly, watching Jenkins disappear down the road. "He would not have made you happy." "Nothing will make me happy," Thea said miserably, tears streaming down her face. "I think I have forgotten how." Zachary looked at her for a long moment, and then he made a decision. "Come with me. I want to show you something." He saddled 2 horses, helped her mount even though she had not ridden in years, and led her out across his land. They rode for about 20 minutes, up into the foothills where aspen trees grew in thick groves. He helped her down and led her through the trees to a small clearing. It was beautiful. Wildflowers still bloomed despite the lateness of the season, and a small creek ran through the grass with a sound like music. The aspen leaves were just beginning to turn gold, shimmering in the breeze, and the mountains rose behind them, vast and eternal. "This is my favorite place," Zachary said. "When things get too heavy, I come here. It reminds me that the world is bigger than my grief." Thea stood there crying, but for the first time she was also looking around, really seeing the beauty of where she was. It did not stop her tears, but it planted something small inside her, a tiny seed of possibility. They sat by the creek, and Zachary told her about his life. He had grown up in Kansas, the oldest of 3 children. His father had been a farmer, his mother a schoolteacher. They had been a happy family until the fever came. He spoke about his sister Sarah, who had been just 18 when she died, full of life and laughter. His voice was rough when he talked about her, and Thea realized he was sharing his own pain to keep her company in hers. "Do you still cry for them?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Not like I used to, but sometimes something will remind me of my mother's laugh or the way Sarah used to sing while she did the washing, and I have to stop what I am doing and just feel it." "I am sorry you lost them," Thea said, and she meant it. Even through her own grief, she could feel compassion for his. "I am sorry you lost your parents," he replied. "It is a terrible thing to be orphaned, no matter how old you are." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the creek and the wind in the aspen leaves. Thea cried, but it was quieter now, less desperate. And when they rode back to the ranch, She found herself noticing things, the way the light hit the mountains, the sound of the horses' hooves on the hard ground, the solid, steady presence of the man riding beside her. Days turned into weeks. Thea stayed in Zachary's home, and a routine developed between them. She took over the cooking and cleaning, not because he asked her to, but because she needed something to occupy her hands and her mind. She cried while she kneaded bread, cried while she mended his shirts, cried while she fed the chickens he kept in a small coop behind the house. Zachary, for his part, went about his work with the cattle and horses, but he found himself structuring his days around her. He would come in for coffee mid-morning just to check on her, would make sure to be back for the midday meal, would sit with her in the evenings even though he had always preferred solitude before. He did not touch her again after that first night when he had held her hand, but his presence was a constant comfort, steady and unhurried. One morning in early October, Thea woke to the sound of geese flying overhead, their calls echoing across the sky. She got up and looked out the window to watch them, great V formations heading south for the winter, and she realized her face was dry. She had not yet started crying today. The realization made her hold her breath, afraid that acknowledging it would start the tears again. She went through her morning routine carefully, quietly, as if moving too fast might break whatever spell had given her this reprieve. She made coffee and breakfast, and when Zachary came in from his morning chores, he looked at her and stopped in the doorway. "You are not crying," he said, his voice full of wonder. As soon as he said it, her eyes filled with tears and she laughed at the same time, a strange, watery sound. "I was not until you mentioned it." But these tears were different, lighter somehow. They fell for a few minutes and then stopped. She wiped her face and smiled at him, a real smile, and something in Zachary's chest tightened at the sight of it. "That is a good smile," he said softly. She felt her cheeks warm. "I was not sure I remembered how." After that, the crying came less frequently. There were still days when grief would wash over her, and she would weep for hours. But there were also days when she could go until afternoon before the tears came. And then days when she only cried once, in the evening quietly, while Zachary sat nearby reading or working on repairing a saddle. As the tears receded, other feelings rushed in to fill the space they had occupied. Thea found herself noticing things about Zachary that had nothing to do with gratitude or grief. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which he was doing more often now. The breadth of his shoulders and the strength in his hands when he worked. The gentle way he spoke to his animals and to her. The sound of his laugh, rare but wonderful when it came. She was falling in love with him, she realized one day in late October. The leaves on the aspen trees were gold now, falling like coins in the wind. She was hanging laundry on the line he had strung up for her, and she looked up to see him riding in from the north pasture, and her heart did something complicated in her chest. It was not just gratitude, though she was grateful. It was not just loneliness seeking comfort, though she had been lonely. It was something deeper, something that took root in her heart and grew tendrils through every part of her being, but she said nothing. He had not indicated that he felt anything for her beyond compassion and perhaps friendship. She was living in his home, eating his food, dependent on his charity. The last thing she wanted was to make him uncomfortable by revealing feelings he might not return. Zachary, for his own part, was engaged in his own internal struggle. He had sworn off women after losing everyone he loved. It hurt too much, he had decided, to care that deeply about someone. Better to live alone, to keep his heart safe behind walls of solitude and hard work. But Thea had slipped past those walls without even trying. Her grief had called to his own, and in comforting her, he had found his own heart beginning to heal. He loved the way she hummed while she cooked, loved the way she had made curtains for the windows from flour sacks, loved the way she talked to his horses, and had befriended the barn cat that he had never been able to get close to. He loved her strength, the way she had faced her grief head-on instead of running from it the way he had. He loved the sound of her laugh, which was coming more frequently now, and the way her eyes lit up when she discovered something new and beautiful in this landscape that was so different from her Missouri home. But he said nothing. She had come here to marry another man. She was young and beautiful and could have her pick of men if she chose. Why would she want a rancher who lived alone, who had nothing to offer but a small spread and a heart that had already been broken once? The first snow came in early November, a light dusting that melted by afternoon but signaled the changing season. Thea stood on the porch watching it fall, and for the first time in months, she did not cry. Instead, she felt a sense of peace, fragile but real. Zachary came to stand beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "Winter comes hard and fast up here in the mountains. We should go to town soon, stock up on supplies before the roads get too bad." "All right," she said. Then, hesitantly, "Zachary, I need to talk to you about something." He tensed, afraid she was going to say she was leaving, that she wanted to go back to Missouri or move on to Denver or find another husband. "What is it?" "I cannot keep living off your charity. It is not right. I need to figure out what I am going to do, how I am going to support myself." Relief and disappointment warred in his chest. She was not leaving, not yet, but she was thinking about it. "You are not living off my charity. You cook and clean and help around the ranch. You earn your keep. But I cannot stay here forever. People will talk. People already talk. This is a small town. Let them talk. It will damage your reputation." "I do not care about my reputation." "Well, I care," Thea said, her voice rising slightly. "I care about your reputation, and I care about what people think of you. You have been nothing but kind to me, and I will not be the cause of gossip that hurts you." They stared at each other, and Zachary felt something crack inside him. "Then marry me." The words were out before he could stop them, and Thea's eyes went wide. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, and now that he had started, he could not stop. "You need a home. I have one. You need a husband. I need a wife. We get along well together. It makes sense." It was possibly the least romantic proposal in the history of proposals, and Thea felt tears sting her eyes, but this time they were tears of hurt and disappointment. "You are asking me to marry you because it makes sense, because it is practical." Zachary ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. "That came out wrong. What I mean is—" "I know what you mean," Thea said quietly. "You feel sorry for me. You have given me a place to stay, and now you feel obligated to make an honest woman of me before the gossips ruin us both." "That is not it." "Then what is it?" He looked at her blue eyes shining with unshed tears, at her lips pressed together to keep them from trembling, at the way the cold air had brought color to her cheeks. And he decided that if he was going to do this, he was going to do it right. "I am saying this all wrong because I am not good with words. But the truth is, somewhere between that first night when I saw you crying on the platform and this moment right now, I fell in love with you. I love the way you have made my house into a home. I love your strength and your kindness. I love that you are not afraid to feel things deeply, even when it hurts. I love the sound of your voice and the way you look in the morning light. I love everything about you, Thea Sinclair, and I want you to marry me, not because it is practical or makes sense, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore." Thea stared at him, tears streaming down her face, but she was also smiling. "You love me." "I love you," he confirmed. "I am sorry it took me so long to say it." "I love you too," she whispered. "I have for weeks now, but I was afraid to tell you. I thought you were just being kind." Zachary closed the small distance between them and took her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I was never just being kind. From that first moment, there was something about you that called to me, and every day since, I have fallen more in love with you." "Then yes," Thea said, her smile breaking through the tears like sun through clouds. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and she tasted like salt and hope and home. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling, and Thea was crying but also laughing, and Zachary held her close, feeling whole for the first time in years. They went to town the next day to see the minister and arrange for the wedding. It would be a simple ceremony, just the two of them and whatever witnesses the minister could round up. Thea bought fabric to make a new dress, refusing to be married in either of her worn traveling dresses. Zachary bought supplies for a celebration dinner and a gold ring from the small jewelry selection at the general store. Word spread quickly, as it always did in small towns. By the time they had been to the bank and the mercantile, everyone knew that Zachary Morgan was marrying the mail-order bride who had come for Robert Jenkins. Most of the reactions were positive. People liked Zachary, respected his hard work and integrity. A few clucked their tongues and whispered about the impropriety of it all, but those voices were drowned out by the well-wishers. One person, however, was not pleased. Robert Jenkins, who had been drinking steadily since he had rejected Thea, heard the news and flew into a rage. He told everyone who would listen that Zachary had stolen his bride, that he had been planning to take Thea back, that Morgan had no right. The owner of the saloon, a pragmatic woman named Martha who had seen too many drunks in her years, finally told Jenkins to shut his mouth. "You rejected that poor girl when she needed someone most. Morgan gave her a home and treated her with respect. He has every right to marry her and you have no claim." But Jenkins was beyond reason. He drank more, stewed in his anger, and began to plot. Thea spent her days before the wedding sewing her dress, a simple gown of blue cotton that matched her eyes. She had not been much of a seamstress before, but Zachary's neighbor, an older widow named Clara who lived on the next ranch over, came by to help and give advice. Clara was thrilled that Zachary was finally getting married. "I have been telling him for years that he needed a wife," Clara said as she helped Thea pin the hem. "He has been alone too long, that boy. Too much grief in him, but you have brought him back to life. I can see it in his eyes when he looks at you. He has done the same for me," Thea said softly. "I was drowning in my grief when I came here. He held me up until I could breathe again." "That is what love is supposed to do," Clara said wisely. "Support each other through the hard times. You two will have a good marriage. I can feel it." The wedding was set for Saturday, November 16th, 2 days before Thea's 23rd birthday. The morning dawned cold and clear, the sky that particular shade of blue that only comes in mountain country. Thea dressed in her new gown with Clara's help, and Clara braided her hair and wove in some late-blooming asters that she had been protecting in her greenhouse. Zachary wore his Sunday best, a dark suit that he had not put on in years. He stood in the small church in Gunnison, his heart pounding as he waited for Thea to arrive. When she walked in on Clara's arm, since she had no father to give her away, he forgot to breathe for a moment. She was beautiful, glowing with happiness, her eyes bright and clear and fixed on him. The ceremony was brief. They spoke their vows in voices that were steady and sure, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed her with a tenderness that made the handful of witnesses smile. They walked out of the church into the sunshine as man and wife, and Thea laughed with pure joy. No tears, just laughter. Zachary pulled her close and spun her around, and for a moment they were the only two people in the world. The celebration dinner at Clara's house was small but festive. Clara had invited a few neighbors, and there was food and music and dancing. Thea danced with her husband, and then with some of the other men present, and Zachary found himself surrounded by older women giving him marriage advice, most of which made him blush. They left as the sun was setting, anxious to get back to their ranch, to begin their life together as husband and wife. The ride home was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, full of anticipation and happiness. That night, in the small bedroom that had been hers and was now theirs, Zachary made love to his wife with a gentleness and passion that made her cry. But these were tears of joy, of completion, of finding home in another person. And afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Thea felt a peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she whispered against his chest. "After losing my parents, I thought happiness was behind me forever." "I thought the same thing," Zachary admitted, his hand stroking her hair. "But grief is not forever even when it feels like it is. Joy finds a way back in if you let it." "We let it in together," Thea said. "Together," he agreed. The winter that followed was hard, as winters in Colorado always were. Snow fell heavily, trapping them on the ranch for days at a time. But the small house was warm and they were together. They spent long evenings by the fire, Zachary reading aloud from the few books he owned while Thea sewed or knitted. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their histories, their dreams, their fears. Thea learned the ranch work, feeding the animals when Zachary had to be out checking on the cattle, helping him repair fences when the spring thaw finally came. She was stronger than she looked, and she was not afraid of hard work. Spring brought new life to the ranch. Calves were born, colts dropped, and Thea planted a garden behind the house. She also discovered she was pregnant, and the joy of telling Zachary was almost too much to contain. He had picked her up and spun her around despite her protests that he would hurt the baby. And then he had become almost comically careful with her, as if she were made of spun glass. "I am not fragile," she laughed one day when he had insisted on carrying a bucket that weighed no more than a few pounds. "You are carrying our child. I will treat you like the precious thing you are," he said stubbornly. Robert Jenkins, who had left town for a few months to work on a ranch up north, returned in April. He had been drinking in town one night when he saw Zachary and Thea coming out of the general store, her pregnancy now visible beneath her dress. Something in him snapped. He followed them as they rode out of town, keeping his distance until they were on the lonelier stretch of road. Then he spurred his horse forward, drunk and angry and looking for a fight. "Morgan," he shouted, "you stole my bride. You owe me." Zachary pulled his wagon to a stop and climbed down, putting himself between Jenkins and Thea. "You are drunk, Jenkins. Go home and sleep it off." "I want compensation. You took what was mine. She was never yours. She is my wife, freely married. Now leave us alone." Jenkins went for his gun, but he was too drunk and too slow. Zachary, who had been a quick draw in his younger days, had his own pistol out faster. He did not shoot, just held it steady, pointed at Jenkins. "Do not make me do this," Zachary said quietly. "Go home." Several men had ridden out from town, hearing the commotion. The sheriff was among them. He took in the scene quickly and rode up to Jenkins, taking the gun from his unresisting hand. "That is enough, Bob. You are coming with me to sleep this off in a cell. And when you are sober, you are going to apologize to Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, and then you are going to leave them alone. You understand me?" Jenkins, faced with the sheriff and several armed men, deflated. He nodded and allowed himself to be led away. The sheriff tipped his hat to Zachary and Thea, and followed his prisoner back to town. Thea, who had watched the whole thing with her heart in her throat, climbed down from the wagon and threw her arms around her husband. She was shaking and tears streamed down her face, the first she had cried in anger and fear rather than grief. "I was so afraid he would hurt you," she sobbed. "I am all right. We are all right," Zachary soothed, holding her close. "He will not bother us again. The sheriff will make sure of it." And he was right. Jenkins, faced with the reality of nearly getting himself killed over a woman who wanted nothing to do with him, finally let go of his anger. He apologized, stiffly and awkwardly, a few days later, and then he left Gunnison for good. They heard later that he had gone to Wyoming to work on a big cattle operation up there. The baby was born in late November, during the first big snowstorm of the season. Clara came to help with the delivery, and Zachary paced the main room like a caged animal, flinching every time he heard Thea cry out. But when Clara finally called him in to meet his son, his hands were shaking as he took the small, red-faced bundle. "A boy," Clara announced proudly. "Healthy as a horse and with a good set of lungs on him." The baby proved her right by letting out a wail that made Zachary jump. Thea, exhausted but radiant, laughed at the expression on her husband's face. "He looks like you," she said softly. "He has your eyes," Zachary countered, though in truth it was hard to tell what color the baby's eyes were. They named him James, after Zachary's father, and gave him the middle name Thomas, after Thea's father. Little James Morgan grew quickly, a strong, healthy baby who filled the house with noise and life. Watching Zachary with their son made Thea fall even more deeply in love with her husband. He was a natural father, patient and gentle, and he sang to James in a low, rumbling voice that never failed to soothe the baby to sleep. The years passed in the way that years do, each season bringing its own rhythm. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Zachary bought more land, increased his herd. Thea's garden flourished, and she sold vegetables and preserves in town. They hired a young man named Peter to help with the ranch work, which freed up some of Zachary's time to spend with his growing family. 2 years after James was born, a daughter arrived. They named her Sarah, after Zachary's lost sister. Sarah had her mother's blue eyes and her father's dark hair, and she was a determined little thing from the moment she was born. Where James was quiet and thoughtful, Sarah was bold and adventurous, getting into everything she could reach. Thea still cried sometimes, but they were good tears now. She cried when James took his first steps, cried when Sarah said her first word, cried when Zachary gave her a locket with pictures of her parents inside for her birthday. They were tears of love and joy and gratitude for the life they had built together. 5 years after their wedding, they were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. James and Sarah were playing in the yard under Peter's watchful eye. Zachary had his arm around Thea's shoulders, and she was leaning into him, content. "Do you ever think about that day at the train station?" she asked softly. "The day we met, all the time," Zachary admitted. "I think about how different my life would be if I had not stopped to help you, if I had just gone on about my business and left you to meet Jenkins. I think about what would have happened if you had not been there," Thea said, shuddering slightly. "If I had been forced to marry him, or if I had been stranded there alone with no money and no way home." "But I was there," Zachary said, tightening his arm around her. "And you are here. And this is our life now." "I was so broken when I came here," Thea said softly. "I could not stop crying. I thought I would drown in grief." "You were brave," Zachary said firmly. "You let yourself feel your grief instead of burying it. That takes more courage than most people have." "You held me up when I could not stand on my own," Thea said, looking up at him with eyes full of love. "You let me cry until I could laugh again." "And now you laugh all the time," Zachary said, smiling. "I love the sound of your laugh." "You should," Thea teased. "You worked hard enough to earn it." As if to prove her point, Sarah came running up to the porch with a frog she had caught, holding it up triumphantly. James was right behind her, trying to explain that she should not be catching frogs because they might jump on her face. The resulting argument, with Sarah insisting she was brave enough to handle any frog and James worrying about frog-related injuries, made both Thea and Zachary laugh. Later that night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, they stood together at the window, looking out at their land bathed in moonlight. Zachary wrapped his arms around his wife from behind, resting his hands on her still flat stomach. In a few months, they would welcome their third child, another reason to celebrate the life they had built together. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "More every day." "I love you too," Thea said, covering his hands with hers. "Thank you for saving me that day. Thank you for giving me a reason to stop crying and start living again." "You saved me too," Zachary said. "I was just existing before you came. You taught me how to live again." They stood there in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other in the midst of grief and had built something beautiful together. Outside, an owl called in the darkness, and the mountains stood eternal watch over the small ranch where two broken hearts had healed and found home in each other. The third baby arrived in the spring, another boy they named Thomas after Thea's father. He was a happy, easy baby, and watching their three children grow and play together filled both Zachary and Thea with a joy that was almost overwhelming in its intensity. James grew into a serious, responsible young man who loved the ranch work and spent all his free time helping his father. Sarah was a force of nature, riding horses as well as any boy, helping her mother in the garden, and reading every book she could get her hands on. Thomas was still too young to show what path he would take, but he was sweet-natured and curious, always asking questions about everything he saw. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Thea back to the Aspen Grove, the place he had first shown her when she could not stop crying. It was autumn again, the leaves turning that brilliant gold that made the whole world seem to glow. The children stayed with Clara, who spoiled them shamelessly with cookies and stories. They stood by the creek, holding hands, and Thea looked around at the beauty that had remained constant through all the changes in their lives. "I still think about that first time you brought me here," she said. "I was crying so hard I could barely see, but even then, this place touched something inside me, a place that remembered beauty and joy were still possible. I knew that day that I was falling in love with you," Zachary confessed. "It scared me. I had sworn off love, convinced myself I was better off alone, but you broke through all my defenses without even trying." "We healed each other," Thea said, smiling up at him. "Two broken people who fit together perfectly." "You are not broken anymore," Zachary said, touching her face gently. "You are whole and strong and beautiful, and I am the luckiest man alive to call you my wife. And you are not the lonely, grieving man I met 10 years ago. You are a husband and a father and the best man I have ever known," Thea said, tears shining in her eyes. But these were happy tears, the kind that came from overwhelming love and gratitude. He kissed her there in the Golden Grove, and it felt like a renewal of their vows, a promise that would carry them through whatever the future held. The years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable changes that time always brings. The children grew. James took over more and more of the ranch work, showing a natural talent for managing both animals and land. Sarah discovered a gift for teaching and began helping at the small school in Gunnison, working with the children who struggled with reading and writing. Thomas, as he grew, showed an artistic bent, always drawing and sketching everything he saw. Zachary and Thea grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They weathered hard winters and dry summers, Years when the cattle prices were good and years when they struggled. Through it all, they supported each other, their bond stronger than anything life could throw at them. Clara, who had become like a mother to both of them, passed peacefully in her sleep when Thea was 35. They grieved for her, but they also celebrated her life and the role she had played in their happiness. Thea cried at the funeral, and Zachary held her hand, remembering another funeral years ago when he had stood alone. He was grateful beyond words that he did not have to face loss alone anymore. On their 20th wedding anniversary, their children planned a surprise celebration. James was 21 now, a man in his own right, courting a sweet young woman from town named Emily. Sarah was 19, independent and determined, with plans to open her own school someday. Thomas was 16, tall and lanky, showing his father's build and his mother's blue eyes. The house was filled with neighbors and friends, people whose lives Zachary and Thea had touched over the years. There was food and music and laughter, and as Zachary looked around at the life they had built, he felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to his own eyes. Thea noticed and came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "Are you all right?" "I am more than all right," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am standing in a house full of people we love, celebrating 20 years of marriage to the most amazing woman I have ever known. I could not be better. 20 years since you saw me crying on that train platform," Thea said, smiling up at him. 20 years since you did not walk away, even though it would have been easier." "Easiest decision I ever made," Zachary said firmly. "Well, that and asking you to marry me." "That was not a very good proposal, if I remember correctly," Thea teased. "You made it sound like a business arrangement." "Until I redeemed myself and told you I loved you," Zachary countered. "That you did," Thea agreed. "And you have shown me every day since then." They danced together as the sun set, moving slowly to the music, surrounded by their children and friends. And Thea realized that she could not remember the last time she had cried tears of sadness. There had been tears of joy, tears of laughter, even tears of frustration when the children were being particularly difficult. But the deep, drowning grief that had consumed her when she first came to Colorado was gone, healed by time and love, and the steady presence of the man who held her in his arms. James married Emily the following spring, and Zachary and Thea became grandparents just 10 months later, when a healthy baby girl named Clara was born. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Thea cried happy tears and thought about her own mother, wishing she could have met this new generation. As if reading her thoughts, Zachary put his arm around her. "Your mother would be so proud of you. Of the woman you have become, the mother you are, the grandmother you will be." "I hope so," Thea said softly. "I hope both our parents are watching somehow, seeing that we survived, that we thrived, that we built something beautiful from the ashes of our grief." "I think they are," Zachary said. "And I think they are smiling." Sarah eventually did open her school, a small building in Gunnison where she taught children of all ages. She never married, declaring that she was too busy with her students and too independent to want a husband. Zachary worried about her, but Thea understood that not every woman needed marriage to be complete. Sarah was happy, fulfilled, making a difference in the lives of countless children. That was enough. Thomas moved to Denver to study art when he was 19, but he came home often, bringing with him sketches and paintings of city life. Eventually, he settled back in Gunnison, opening a small studio where he painted portraits and landscapes. He married a quiet woman named Rose who worked at the library, and they had 2 children, both boys who showed their father's artistic talent. As Zachary and Thea moved into their 50s, they slowed down a bit. Zachary let James take over more of the ranch operations, though he still liked to ride out and check on things. Thea continued her garden, now famous throughout the county for her vegetables and flowers. She taught her daughter-in-law Emily and Rose all her secrets, passing down knowledge the way it had been passed to her by Clara years ago. They still went to the Aspen Grove, their special place, several times a year. In spring, when wildflowers bloomed. In summer, when the creek ran high and cold with snowmelt. In autumn, when the leaves turned gold. Even in winter, when snow covered the ground and made the world clean and white, on their 30th anniversary, they made the trip with some difficulty. Zachary's knees were not what they used to be, and Thea had to stop and catch her breath more often. But they made it, settling on a blanket by the creek, holding hands and watching the aspen leaves shimmer in the breeze. 30 years, Thea said wonderingly. How did it go so fast? The best years always do, Zachary said, but I would not change a single one of them. Not even the hard ones. The years when we struggled, when money was tight, when the children were sick or difficult. Not even those, Zachary said firmly, because we faced them together. That made all the difference. Thea leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had been her anchor for 3 decades. I love you so much, more now than even on the day we married. I love you too. You are my heart, Thea. You have been since the day I saw you crying on that platform and could not walk away. I am glad you could not walk away, Thea said, smiling. I am glad you stopped and spoke to me. I am glad you offered me shelter and safety and eventually your heart. I am glad you said yes, Zachary replied. I am glad you trusted me enough to come home with me that first day. I am glad you let me hold you while you cried until you could laugh again. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the creek and the wind in the leaves. 2 people who had found each other at their lowest moments and had built a life that exceeded anything either of them could have imagined. 2 people who had learned that grief, while devastating, was not permanent. That love could heal the deepest wounds. That 2 broken hearts could mend together and become something stronger than they had been alone. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they made their slow way back to their horses. The ride home was leisurely, and when they arrived at the ranch, they found it full of life. James and Emily had brought the grandchildren for a visit. Sarah had ridden out from town. Thomas and Rose had come with their boys. The house rang with laughter and noise, with children playing and adults talking, with the sounds of a family that was loved and whole. Thea stood in the doorway, watching her family, and felt tears slip down her cheeks. But she was smiling too, because these were tears of pure joy, of gratitude for the incredible gift of this life she had been given. Zachary came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, something he had done 1,000 times over the years. Happy anniversary, my love. Happy anniversary, Thea replied, turning in his arms to kiss him. Thank you for everything, for saving me, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful life. Thank you for letting me, Zachary said simply. Thank you for choosing me, for staying with me, for building this life with me. They stood there, holding each other, surrounded by the noise and warmth of their family. 2 people who had weathered storms and sunshine, grief and joy, loss and love. 2 people who had found each other in the wilderness and had built a home, not just in walls and wood, but in each other's hearts. The evening wore on with dinner and stories, with grandchildren demanding attention and children catching up on each other's lives. When everyone had finally gone home or gone to bed, Zachary and Thea sat together on their porch, wrapped in a blanket against the cool night air, watching the stars wheel overhead. You remember what you said to me that first night? Thea asked. When I could not stop crying. I said a lot of things that first night, Zachary said, smiling in the darkness. You said that grief was like a debt I had to pay before I could move on. You said I had to feel it all before it would get better. I remember. You were right, Thea said, and you helped me pay that debt. You sat with me while I cried. You never made me feel like I was too much or that my grief was inconvenient. You just let me feel it all until I came out the other side. You would have made it through even without me, Zachary said. You are stronger than you know. Maybe, Thea allowed. But I am glad I did not have to. I am glad I had you. Always, Zachary promised. For whatever years we have left, you will always have me. And you will always have me, Thea replied. They sat there under the stars, two souls intertwined, two hearts beating as one. And in the morning, they would wake to another day of their life together, another day of small joys and simple pleasures, another day of the love that had carried them through 3 decades and would carry them through whatever came next. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. More grandchildren were born. The ranch continued to prosper under James's capable management. Sarah's school grew, and she took on 2 assistant teachers to help with the growing number of students. Thomas's paintings began to sell beyond Gunnison, and he gained a reputation as one of the finest artists in Colorado. And through it all, Zachary and Thea remained the constant heart of the family. They were the ones everyone came to for advice, for comfort, for wisdom gained through years of living and loving well. They were the proof that love could endure, that 2 people who committed to each other could weather anything. When Zachary turned 60, he finally admitted that he needed to fully retire from ranch work. His knees were bad, his back sometimes gave him trouble, and the long days in the saddle were more punishment than pleasure now. But he did not mind. He had built something lasting, something he could pass down to his son and grandson. He could rest now, knowing his legacy was secure. Thea's 60th birthday was celebrated with a huge party that her children insisted on throwing. Friends and neighbors came from all over to celebrate the woman who had touched so many lives with her kindness and strength. There were speeches and toasts, and more than one person mentioned how far she had come from the crying woman who had arrived on the train platform 38 years ago. When it was Zachary's turn to speak, he stood and looked at his wife, this woman who had been his partner for nearly 4 decades, and his voice was thick with emotion. Most of you know how we met, how I saw her crying on the train platform and could not walk away. What you might not know is that she saved me as much as I saved her. I was half a man before she came into my life, going through the motions but not really living. She taught me how to love again, how to hope again, how to build a life worth living. She gave me children and grandchildren, yes, but more than that, she gave me herself. Her courage, her strength, her endless capacity for love. I am the man I am today because of her. And I would not trade a single moment of our life together, not the hard times or the easy ones, not the tears or the laughter. All of it was worth it because I got to spend it with her. There was not a dry eye in the room when he finished, least of all Thea's. She went to him and he held her close, and everyone applauded, celebrating not just her birthday but the love story that had sustained them all these years. As they grew older still, moving into their 70s, they slowed down even more, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper, quieter, more profound. They knew each other so completely that words were often unnecessary. A glance, a touch, a smile was enough to communicate volumes. They still went to the aspen grove when weather and health permitted, though now they drove a wagon instead of riding horses. They would sit by the creek for hours, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence, always together. On a bright autumn day in their 47th year of marriage, they made the trip one last time. The leaves were gold, the air was crisp, and the creek sang its eternal song. They sat close together, wrapped in blankets, watching the light play through the leaves. "It is as beautiful as ever," Thea said softly. "This place has always been magic to me." "It is where I fell in love with you," Zachary said. "Really, truly fell in love. The day I brought you here and you started to see past your grief to the beauty around you, that was the day I knew." "I fell in love with you even earlier," Thea confessed. "That first night when you sat with me and held my hand and told me about your own losses, when you showed me I was not alone in my grief, that was when my heart started to belong to you." 47 years, Zachary marveled. "And I love you more today than I did then." "As I love you," Thea said, taking his weathered hand in hers. "You are my everything, Zachary Morgan, my savior, my husband, my best friend, my love. And you are mine," Zachary said. "You always have been and you always will be." They stayed until the sun began to set, then reluctantly made their way home. That night, lying in bed in the darkness, Thea turned to her husband. "Promise me something," she said softly. "Anything. Promise me that whoever goes first, the one who is left behind, will not give up. We'll keep living, keep loving the children and grandchildren, keep finding joy." Zachary's arms tightened around her. "Thea, promise me," she insisted. "We have both known grief. We know how it can drown you if you let it. Promise me you will not let it drown you if I go first." "I promise," Zachary said, though the words hurt, "but you have to promise me the same thing." "I promise," Thea said, "though I hope we have many more years together first." "As do I," Zachary said fervently. "As do I." They did have more years, blessed years full of great-grandchildren and quiet days on the porch and slow walks around the property they both loved. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with another huge party, this one attended by what seemed like half the county. 5 decades of marriage, and they were still as devoted to each other as they had been on their wedding day. Zachary passed first in his sleep, just after his 80th birthday. He went peacefully, his hand in Thea's, his last word her name. She held him as his breathing slowed and stopped, and she cried then, the first truly hard crying she had done in decades. But even through her grief, she felt gratitude. Gratitude that he had not suffered, that he had lived a long and full life, that she had been blessed to spend 52 years as his wife. At the funeral, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, Thea spoke about the man who had saved her on a train platform in 1878 and had loved her every day since. She spoke about his kindness, his strength, his unwavering devotion. And she spoke about the promise they had made each other, to keep living even after one was gone. "He would not want me to stop living because he is gone," she said, her voice steady even though tears streamed down her face. "He would want me to keep going, to keep loving all of you, to keep finding joy in each new day. And I will do that because I promised him. But more than that, I will do it to honor the life we built together. I will do it because the best way to love him now is to keep living the way he taught me to live, with courage and hope and an open heart." She kept her promise. Thea lived for 6 more years, surrounded by her family, still tending her garden in the summer, still telling stories about Zachary to anyone who would listen. She kept the ranch house exactly as it had been when he was alive, his chair by the fireplace, his coat on the hook by the door. His presence still felt in every corner. She went to the aspen grove one last time, driven by James and accompanied by all 3 of her children. They walked slowly to the creek, and Thea stood there, remembering all the times she and Zachary had come here over the years. All the conversations, the silences, the promises made and kept. "This is where your father told me he loved me for the first time," she told her children. This is where we came to remember that the world was bigger than our troubles. This is where we renewed our love for each other again and again. It is a special place, Sarah said, her arm around her mother. It is, Thea agreed. And when I am gone, I want some of my ashes scattered here, mixed with your father's, so we can be part of this place forever. They promised they would, and Thea was content. She passed in her sleep on a winter night just shy of her 84th birthday. She went peacefully, in the same bed where Zachary had died, in the same house where they had raised their children and built their life together. And her last thought, as she drifted away, was of a day long ago when a cowboy with kind eyes had stopped to help a crying woman on a train platform, and two broken hearts had found each other and become whole. Her children did as she had asked. They scattered her ashes in the aspen grove, mixing them with Zachary's so that the two were together again, part of the land they had loved. And as they stood there, the autumn leaves golden overhead, a breeze stirred the ashes and carried them into the creek, where they would flow together forever. James took over the ranch fully now, passing it eventually to his own son. The house where Zachary and Thea had lived remained in the family, generation after generation living there, loving there, building their own stories on the foundation that had been laid so many years before. And when those future generations walked through the aspen grove or sat on the porch of the old house, they sometimes felt a presence, something warm and loving that seemed to watch over them. The children said it was their great-great-grandparents, still together, still loving each other, still blessing the family they had created. The story of Zachary and Thea became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. The story of the mail-order bride who could not stop crying and the cowboy who held her until she could laugh again. The story of two people who found each other in grief and built a love that lasted not just a lifetime, but generations. A love that proved that healing was possible, that hope could be found even in the darkest moments, and that sometimes the greatest blessings come wrapped in tears. Their love story lived on in their descendants, in the ranch that still prospered, in the town of Gunnison where their names were still spoken with respect and affection. And somewhere in the Colorado mountains, in a grove of aspen trees by a singing creek, two souls rested together, their love eternal, their promise kept, their story complete.